You stop walking. Your throat is dry. Your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth, and the air shimmers in waves above a flat, cracked expanse of earth that stretches to the horizon with no end. There is no river, no lake, no map, no signal, no satellite, no bottle in your hand. You have roughly 72 hours before your body begins shutting down from dehydration, and the clock started long before you noticed you were thirsty. Now here is what should stop you cold. For 99% of human history, this was not an emergency. This was Tuesday. Your ancestors lived for over 300,000 years in landscapes that would kill a modern human within days. The Kalahari Desert, the Saharan interior, the bone-dry steppes of Central Asia, the parched Australian outback. And they did not just pass through these places, they lived in them, raised children in them, grew old in them, without water bottles, without plumbing, without any of the infrastructure we have quietly outsourced our survival to. They found water, consistently, reliably, in terrain where no water appeared to exist. How? The answer is not luck. It is not instinct in the simple animal sense. It is something more impressive than either of those things. It is layered, accumulated, tested against reality knowledge built across thousands of generations, encoded in the land itself, in the behavior of animals, in the shape of plants, in the color of soil, and in the texture of the ground beneath bare feet. Knowledge so dense and so finely calibrated that it reads, to anyone trained inside it, like a living map of the entire landscape. Anthropologist Richard Lee spent years living alongside the sand people of the Kalahari, one of the last populations on Earth to maintain a living continuity with the ancient foraging way of life. What he documented, beginning with landmark fieldwork in the 1960s, fundamentally changed how scientists understood prehistoric survival. The sand did not wander. They did not stumble into water by chance. They moved through their landscape with extraordinary precision, navigating by a mental map that contained dozens of water sources, some permanent, many seasonal, some invisible to anyone who had not been taught to see them. That map was not written down. It was spoken, sung, embedded in stories told at night beside fires. It was transmitted from grandparent to grandchild over decades of guided observation, and it accumulated new information with every generation that passed through the same corridors of land. Your ancestors did not carry water, they carried knowledge. So what exactly did that knowledge contain? The first layer was the behavior of other animals. Every creature in a dry landscape faces the same problem you do, and unlike you, they have had millions of years to solve it. Your ancestors understood this. They read the behavior of other species the way a navigator reads the stars. Birds were one of the most reliable signals. Doves and sandgrouse are physiologically bound to water. They must drink once a day, every day without exception. And when they move toward water, they do not wander. They fly in a straight, direct, purposeful line. At dawn and again at dusk, a flock of doves cutting across an open sky at unusual speed, moving with that particular deliberate directness, is an arrow. It is pointing at water. Your ancestors saw this. They learned to read it. They adjusted their direction without hesitation. Elephants are perhaps even more extraordinary. Research by Shifra Goldenberg and Cynthia Moss, drawn from decades of observation in Kenya's Amboseli ecosystem and published in the journal Animal Behavior, confirmed that elephant matriarchs navigate toward water sources across distances of 50 kilometers or more using a combination of infrasound sensing and a spatial memory that can span generations. Your ancestors shared the African landscape with elephants for hundreds of thousands of years. They followed elephant trails. They watched where herds moved at the onset of dry seasons. In many ancient landscapes, the knowledge of elephant paths and the knowledge of water were simply the same knowledge, expressed differently. Baboons offered another signal. The naturalist Eugene Marais, who spent years observing baboon troops in the South African bush in the early 20th century, documented how a troop moving toward water behaved differently from a troop foraging. They moved fast, in a column, without stopping, with a directed, urgent quality entirely distinct from the meandering, stop-and-start pattern of a troop looking for food. Ancient humans lived alongside baboon troops for hundreds of thousands of years. That signal would have been as obvious and as informative as a road sign. But animal behavior was only one layer. The second layer was botany. Certain plants grow only where underground water exists within reach of their roots. The surface above them looks identical to any other patch of ground. But to trained eyes, those plants are blazing markers. In the Kalahari, the bai plant, known scientifically as Raphianachmi burkei, is a small, almost invisible surface vine growing above a massive underground tuber that can hold several liters of water. James Suzman, an anthropologist whose fieldwork with sand communities spans more than 2 decades and who documented this knowledge extensively in his research on Bushman life, observed skilled foragers locating bitubers from surface signs alone, a particular curl in the vine's leaves, a slight discoloration of the surrounding soil, then digging down to a tuber the size of a large melon and extracting enough liquid to sustain a person through the heat of an afternoon. Sama melons, wild relatives of the watermelon, grew across vast stretches of arid southern Africa. Sand hunters carrying nothing else could remain active and well hydrated in temperatures that would hospitalize a modern athlete, eating the flesh and drinking the juice of melons that had extracted underground water through deep roots and concentrated it into dense, portable, self-contained packages. Trees told the same story. Fig trees, tamarind trees, and certain fever trees in arid environments almost always root near groundwater. A lone tree standing in otherwise bare savanna is not a random event. It is the landscape marking its own resources. Your ancestors read it as precisely as you would read the label on a water bottle. The third layer was geology. Rock type determines where water moves underground. Limestone is porous, it holds seeps. Granite forces water to the surface along fault lines. Clay traps moisture just below the ground level. Ancient humans learned to read stone the same way they read plants and animals. A particular color of rock in an otherwise uniform landscape, a subtle depression in otherwise flat ground, a slight darkening of soil in a dry stream bed that suggested moisture just below the surface. These were readable signals, and your ancestors read them fluently. So let's reconstruct a morning. You are moving with a small group, 5, maybe 7 people, through dry savanna in what is now southern Africa, roughly 80,000 years ago. The season is late dry. The last water source you camped near is 3 days behind you. Your grandmother is leading. She has walked this corridor twice in her lifetime. She was told about it by her own grandmother before that. She is watching the ground. Specifically, she is watching the way dry grasses lean at their roots. In areas above subsurface moisture, the lean is subtly outward, the root systems pulling from a direction that rainfall alone would not explain. She is also watching the birds. At mid-morning, 3 sand grouse cut across the group's path. They are moving northeast, fast, directly. No one speaks. Your grandmother adjusts her direction. Everyone follows. 2 hours later, your group finds a seep, not a river, not a spring, a seep, a place where water pushes slowly up through limestone into a shallow hollow, collecting at a rate of perhaps 2 cupped handfuls per minute. But it is there. It has been there for thousands of years. And your grandmother's grandmother's grandmother knew its location and passed that knowledge forward through every generation between her death and this morning. Archaeologist Francesco Derrico and colleagues, analyzing ochre-engraved artifacts from Blombos Cave on the southern coast of South Africa, one of the most important Middle Stone Age sites in the world, with evidence of symbolic and cognitive complexity dating back at least 100,000 years, have argued that the mental architecture required for this kind of multi-generational environmental mapping was already fully present in early Homo sapiens. The ability to hold abstract spatial information, to encode it in communicable form, to transmit it across generations, and to update it with new observation was the same cognitive infrastructure that produced art, language, and planning. Finding water was not a primitive survival task separate from higher intelligence. It was higher intelligence, applied relentlessly over tens of thousands of years to the most immediate problem that life presented every single day. And here is the twist. We tend to imagine ancient foragers as desperate, constantly teetering on the edge of death from thirst. The record does not support this. Tracking researcher Louis Liebenberg, who trained alongside sand trackers for years and documented their environmental knowledge in his study The Art of Tracking, noted repeatedly that experienced sand hunters could locate water in landscapes that fully equipped European explorers had died in. Not because the Europeans were less intelligent, because the Europeans did not carry the knowledge. The scarcity was never in the land. The scarcity was in the knowledge of how to read it. Here's what that means for you. You live in a time of extraordinary abundance. Water flows into your home at the turn of a handle, at any hour, without effort or thought. You have never had to read a sandgrouse's flight path. You have never identified a bituber or followed the lean of dry grass to a limestone seep. You have never needed to. But your brain was built for exactly this kind of reading. The neural architecture that allowed your ancestors to process dozens of landscape signals simultaneously, to hold complex spatial maps in memory across decades, to transmit hard-won knowledge through story and song and guided attention. That architecture is still yours, intact, waiting. You are not separate from this knowledge. You are downstream from it. Every cup of water you have ever drunk in your life was made possible, somewhere back in the long chain of your ancestry, by a grandmother who knew which way the birds were flying. You stop walking. Your throat is dry, the horizon is flat and empty. But somewhere out there, the land is talking. Your ancestors spent 300,000 years learning how to listen,